Tech folks. There we go. Good morning, everyone. My name is Bill Smith. I'm president of the Steinman Alumni Association. I have the pleasure of introducing these breakfasts. This is our first breakfast for the season. Peter Secchia is here today, Ambassador Secchia. Thank you so much for sponsoring these breakfasts. We appreciate it. I saw our own Dean Lawson rolling around here somewhere. I'm not sure where she went, but Dean Lawson's with us here this morning as well. You'll also notice that there are programs on your table. Those programs list upcoming events. Our next event, get it on your calendar now, is November 6th. That will be Doug Conant. He is the former CEO of Campbell Soup, and that looks to be a really good program. Also on the table are some interesting did you knows. Look those over. They're pretty interesting. And always, being a Laker for a lifetime, if you feel the need, the love, give a little to Grand Valley, and it helps us keep these programs going. So also here today, we have a lot of students, and we love students at these Steinman breakfasts. Peter, I know, has a love for students and likes to see us encourage students here. So students, maybe a wave of a hand so that everybody can see. We've got a great group of students out here today. Probably an inappropriate joke, but I think some of them thought blue economy meant something different, Alan, so they showed up to here today. So on that note, yeah. So where else in the world would you go and find 5 freshwater lakes within a short drive? And if you were in Michigan, which touches 4 of the 5 Great Lakes and holds 20% of the world's surface fresh water, and you were looking for a top water resource authority, how far would you go? Where would you look? Who would you rely on? And as freshwater quantity and quality become increasingly important for economic growth, quality of life, global security, you find that Michigan is in a tremendous geographic advantage compared to the rest of the world. Well, where we would go is our guest speaker today. Our guest speaker for this Secchia breakfast is Alan Steinman, director of the Grand Valley State University's Annis Water Resource Institute since 2001. Alan, I wanted to call the office and see how they answer that. That's a long name for an organization. Well, Alan has spoken around the globe. He's published over 135 scientific articles, book chapters, been awarded over $50 million in grants for scientific and engineering projects. He's raised over $5 million in private donations. He's testified before Congress. He's testified before the Michigan and Florida state legislatures on water issues. He's been recognized by more awards than I have time to list. Alan, it was incredible when you start looking at the list. The only thing that was more incredible is his give back. When I looked at the number of boards he sits on, I wondered how he has time to do any research and run the Water Institute. And I suspect maybe your wife wonders that some days too. So Alan, if you would join me and tell us about Michigan's blue economy, why water matters.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Bill. Now that he's talked about water economy, I can sit down. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor and a privilege, and hopefully you'll find this entertaining and informative as I go through this. If we can have the first slide, please. Great. In order to talk about the blue economy, Michigan's blue economy, I need to put this in a global context when we talk about the blue planet. And are we advancing? Can I advance this? No, I can't. Right? The up arrow? Thank you. It turns out that 97.7% of the water on this planet is actually in the oceans. It's salty. It's not readily consumable or potable for human consumption. And of the 2.3% that is fresh, fully 2/3 of that, all right, this is going to be interesting, How would you like me to do this? Do you want me to point at you to advance slides? I'm giving up on that. 2/3 of that is tied up in ice caps and glaciers. Most of the rest of that is in groundwater, but it's deep groundwater, and it's contaminated, so it's not readily potable. So that leaves, if I can get the next slide, a slight sliver, 0.007%, that is available, that's readily consumable. That's in our shallow aquifers, it's in our rivers, our lakes that we can readily use. And of that 0.007%, it's not distributed uniformly across this planet. In fact, it's very patchy in terms of its distribution, and we're really fortunate here in Michigan that we have 20% of the world's surface fresh water. Next slide, please. So this provides our geographic advantage. Can we move it? Apparently not. So we missed the geographic advantage. This is going to be, all right, so we were talking earlier about the difficulty in technology and how one has to be spontaneous and extemporaneous, so I'm really going to focus on this. If we can go back one slide. All right, obviously that's not showing, but there's a series of bullets here that tells you what our geographic advantage is. Where 4 of the 5 Great Lakes prefer Michigan, where we have 11,000 inland lakes. I know Minnesota claims the land of 10,000 lakes. We have more inland lakes than Minnesota. We have more than 1/3 of the total coastline of the Great Lakes, with 3,400 miles of coastline touching the Great Lakes here in Michigan. And in aggregate, this provides this incredible geographic advantage that no other location on this planet has. Next slide, please. So that gives us pure Michigan. Whether we're looking at the water from an aesthetic purpose, whether we're fishing or recreating on this water, whether we're using it for industrial activities, no other location on this planet has this incredible abundance of fresh water that we can use. And I want to caveat this because I'm going to be talking about the use of this water, but we want to make sure that we use it wisely. We want to use it sustainably so that it's here for future generations, both with respect to water quantity and water quality. Next slide, please. So as a consequence, we decided a couple of years ago with funding from the Mott Foundation, my co-author John Austin and I started inventorying what is going on around blue economy in this state. And we focused on 3 main sectors. We focused on business, we focused on higher education, and we focused on placemaking, community development around water. And as part of this, we inventoried what was going on, we figured out what this was worth to the state currently, and then identified what barriers that might exist for us to move this forward and really think about a strategic use to this water. Because right now, what's going on around water in the state is being done by default. There's no strategic plan for dealing with this. And we hope that this will catalyze that kind of action. Next slide. So obviously, none of my text is showing up here, which is going to be a problem. And I'm not sure why that is. But there were 6 main themes. I'm going to try and remember this as best as possible to the report. The first is dealing with our past into the future. The second is going to be talking about the blue economy in aggregate. Then I'm briefly going to talk about blue business, higher education, placemaking, and then talk about some catalysts that might move this forward. So next slide, we'll see what happens. Hold on a second. I actually did print this out, so if you can bear with me.
You can talk from here.
Yeah, really. There's very little reason to do this. There'll be a few slides, I think, that will show up. All right. Next slide. Let's see. So exploration. So obviously, the Native Americans first settled this area, and they lived around water. They got their sustenance from water, the fisheries. They did commerce and navigated through water. But then the Europeans came in the 1800s, and as a consequence, they looked on this landscape, and they saw a limitless fishery. Right? They saw these large eastern white pine forests, tall, straight lumber, great resource. They saw fertile farmland. Once they drained the wetlands in the southern part of the state, largely for farming, and then secondly, to take care of malaria, because malaria was a real problem in the 1830s and 40s when people settled this area. And then finally, up in the UP, we had minerals to extract. So let's see what the next slide shows. So In the lower part of the southern part of the Lower Peninsula, we had these hardwood forests, which they were drained and cleared. In the northern part, we had the eastern white pine forests. Next slide, please. And we were very effective. When the lumber barons started coming into Michigan in the 1850s and 60s, they looked out on these eastern white pine forests and said, we have a century worth of lumber. They wiped it out in 10 years. You can see how effective they are. When we put our mind to it, we can extract our resources really efficiently. Next slide, please. Muskegon River, during a lumber mill run, you could walk across the river without touching the water. There was so much lumber going down. Next slide, please. In 1888, at the height of the lumber boom in Muskegon, we had 47 active sawmills on that lake. For a short period of time, about 9 months, we had more millionaires per capita in Muskegon than any other city in the world. But of course, it didn't last very long. When we talk about utilizing our water resources in this state, we don't want to use this as our example, as our model, right? Next slide, please. Okay, so going back to text, once the lumber boom ended, the Industrial Revolution came in. And the industry they needed water as well. They needed water to cool their engines, to turn their mills, all of this, so they were settling around water. And this helped fuel a new industry, a new economic activity in this state. So whether you were in, for example, Battle Creek, focused around cereal, Muskegon and Kalamazoo around lumber, Grand Rapids around furniture, Midland around chemicals, they all needed to settle on water. They needed water to help fuel that economy. Next slide, please. Grand Rapids, the Grand River, 1911. Factories and foundries, Crescent Flour, all right here along the river because they were utilizing the water to help fuel that economy and then utilizing the water as their sewers because they were dumping stuff directly into the sewers. Next slide. This is the Rouge plant. There's a reason the Rouge plant was built at the confluence of the Rouge and Detroit rivers. They were taking our raw materials from around the state by sea, by water, bringing it in there, and 2 days later out was coming fully formed automobiles, which then could be shipped out by water or by rail. Again, water was an essential part of this industrial revolution. Next slide, please. You can tell the ones that have text. There is text back there, believe it or not. So as a consequence, we ended up turning our backs to the water because we were using them as cesspools. This is where the debris was being put. This is where we were, it just wasn't aesthetically pleasing. And in fact, these are the communities, the areas in our communities where there were people of ill repute that were hanging out as well. And so it wasn't a place where we were really going to focus. The chambers of commerce were not going to focus on our waterfronts at that point. And just an example, again, using the Grand River as an example, and I could use any municipality in the Great Lakes. Next slide, please. Whenever you're ready. Here's the Grand, and again from 1911, you're looking right along this, and you can see the debris along the shoreline. Could you imagine this right now, if it was in Grand Rapids, what that land would be worth along Front Street? So next slide, please. So this leads to the water future. We've talked about the past, the present, and the future, and there are 3 areas where we can really focus on for the future of water in this state. One is focused around trade. Southeast Michigan is actually, in terms of the activities around Detroit and Port Huron gateways, has the largest international tradeway by value on the planet. And that's done by default. We're not even really trying to mobilize more activity in that area. Hopefully we can build another bridge, make things happen even more, but already it's of incredible value around water. We need to convert. Certainly the manufacturing industries today are critical for our state. But there's opportunities in the future around advanced manufacturing, around water, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then finally around education and research. We have 15 state universities in Michigan. Most of them have recognized that there's value in water, or starting some kind of water program. There's a number of water institutes, not just Grand Valley around the state, but we're all operating independently. There's no strategic plan for people to work collaboratively and cooperatively to drive higher education around water resources. Next slide. So we have the Grand Rapids Whitewater Project, right? What a great example of taking a waterfront, transforming it, and doing something innovative. The Anderson Economic Group did a study last year, and they found that this $27 million project would return $16 to $19 million per year in recreational activity to Grand Rapids. So it pays for itself in less than 2 years. But in addition to the economic activity in Grand Rapids, think about the civic pride that goes with these kinds of projects. This is the kind of stuff that communities rally around. It's not just the beer city in Grand Rapids. There's more to it than just that. Not that there's anything wrong with beer. In fact, I'll talk about beer in a second. Next slide, please. So this leads us to blue economy. And the question is, how exactly do these water-related activities aggregate to make up the blue economy? And there are 5 major ways that that happens. And I'm going to briefly talk about each of these 5. Next slide, please. So the first is legacy uses. And this includes the kinds of activities that have occurred historically that are still important today: transportation, shipping, ports, commercial fishing, which you can see here. And although the text doesn't show up, the shipping accounts for about $3.3 billion in annual wages per year around the warehousing, the commercial traffic, the freight traffic. And the fisheries, commercial fisheries, are worth about $50 million per year. Next slide, please. There's the big water users. And historically, this has meant agriculture, and I'm sure Jim will talk a little more about that, manufacturing, energy, and beverages. Next, advance. So we can talk about what Michigan, agriculture is a huge economic sector in this state. But also, obviously, beer is very important, too, in the Grand Rapids area. And that's because water is the foundation for good beer. I spent a significant part of my life growing up in Rhode Island. And in Rhode Island, the local beer is Narragansett, for those of you who may have spent time in that part of the world, Gansett for short. And they used to have ads on TV saying, "Narragansett, it's the water." And we go, yeah, that's the problem. That is not, I could actually give a very brief tangent. Narragansett, the beer was so bad that on the inside of the bottle cap were rebuses. Does everybody know what a rebus is? Do you remember no, the students aren't going to remember this. There used to be a game show called Concentration, and they would flip this, and you'd be able to, so I love New York, I heart New York, that's a rebus. You'd have an I, and then you'd have a heart, right? Okay. So the rebuses in the Narragansett bottle caps were totally unsolvable. It was impossible to solve them. And I swear this was a marketing tool on their part, because if you were so focused on trying to solve this, you didn't think about how bad the beer was. Okay, next slide, please. Around water technology, this is another area for growth into the future, where we talk about new technologies around water cleaning, around water conservation. The biggest cost to utilities is, in terms of water, is moving the water. It's not the price of the water molecule, which is free. It's actually the cost of pumping. If we can figure out how to conserve water or be more efficient in pumping water, there's tremendous gains, economic gains here around this, which would be passed on to consumers. The next slide, please. Around water education and research centers, again, we should be pioneering the solutions around water, taking advantage. Instead of being complacent about our water resources, let's utilize the water resources efficiently to come up with new technologies, new engineering solutions to cleaning our water, utilizing our water, conserving our water, figuring out ways that water can help drive the economy. And then, next slide, please. So this isn't going to show up at all, unfortunately, but this would be a slide of one of our graduate students working on the hydrate biosand filters, which are produced. Excellent, thank you. So Nicole Horn, one of our graduate students, and you can see the biosand filter at the bottom here, and that's produced by Cascade Engineering right here in Grand Rapids. We are working with Cascade Engineering to optimize the utilization of these biosand filters. We are deploying them. Next slide, please. In Ghana, you can see, here's the water source. Nicole is sampling the water source on the right. That's not the kind of thing that you would normally want to drink in and of itself. They bring the water back to their homes. Next slide, please. And this is, back. This is a slide of one of their houses. The owner is on the right, Nicole's on the left, and here's the biosand filter. After it goes through the filter, it comes out as potable water, and it's stored in that orange tank. As long as the biosand filter stays hydrated, stays wet, we've shown that it can be effective for up to 10 years. So going out into these developing countries that have no potable water and giving them the ability to drink water. What an incredibly powerful thing for students to do and for us to be involved with. as well as the folks here in Grand Rapids. And I give tremendous credit to Fred and Christina Keller for the work that they're doing around this. Next slide, please. So, and then finally, there's water placemaking. And again, there's economic impacts. I think we all realize this. As we, instead of turning our backs to the water like we did a century ago, let's turn our fronts to the water, right? And have recreational use, have access to the water. That is critical. So the next slide, which is not going to show up as text, but collectively, the blue economy with these 5 major uses accounts for roughly 1 in 5 jobs in the state of Michigan and over $60 billion on an annual basis in economic impact. Right? It is not a trivial consideration in the state. And again, let me emphasize, this is happening organically, by default, without any targeted strategic plan to utilize our water from some kind of developed strategy. Okay, next slide. So briefly, I'm going to talk about the blue business, higher ed, and placemaking. The MEDC, where Dave is associated and housed, as cataloged, there's more than 350 emerging water-related technology businesses in this state. Not all of them are going to survive, right, of the 350. But there's tremendous interest. In fact, venture capitalists are investing anywhere between $50 and $500 billion on water-related technologies. Now, most of that is occurring in California, in the Middle East, where there's a tremendous, hey, wow, I have text. Very cool. Thank you. Next, can you just, does that also mean that this works now? No, it doesn't. They only give so much, you know. All right, next slide, please. All right, so VC, 50 billion worldwide, 370 million in the US, because they recognize the tremendous opportunity around water. And while the water scarce areas have the greatest need, we have the greatest opportunity because we have the water right at our fingertips. Okay, next slide, please. Higher ed, there's investment going on around water. Michigan Tech, upper left, just built a $25 million facility around water in Lake Superior. Millions of dollars have been invested in the biostation at CMU on Beaver Island on water-related activities for the Northern Archipelago. Anybody who's been up to Traverse City and been to the Northwestern Michigan College's campus recognizes what a beautiful facility they have overlooking the bay. And just 2 years ago, we dedicated a new field station at our Annis Water Resources Institute to increase our research capabilities around water. Next slide, please. And then placemaking, all right? Anybody know where the upper left slide is from? Dave can't speak. Anybody? Guess, please. There's no cost to having a wrong answer. Holland, wrong. Sorry. That's Manistee. That's their Riverwalk. How about upper right? Bay City. Lower left, everybody knows, right? And lower right, everybody knows, hopefully in this room, okay? Tremendous activity around placemaking, and not just on coastal communities, but inland as well, all right? People are recognizing the incredible value of bringing people to the water and the activities around that water. Next slide, please. So what we have is restoring these areas that have been abused from our past industrial activities. We know from studies that property values for those communities, the coastal communities that touch the Great Lakes, increase in value by 10%. The hedonic prices by 10% when we restore these aquatic ecosystems. Even for urban cities that are 40 miles from a Great Lake, even though they might call themselves a Great Lake city, remind anybody of any urban areas, you get a bump of 1 to 2% for the activities that are going on in Holland and in Muskegon in Grand Rapids. Next slide, please. And then, thanks to the work that's done by Paul Isley here at the Seidman College, working with us at the Institute out in Muskegon, and other work that's been done, for every dollar you invest in ecosystem restoration for water, you get a return of anywhere from 3.1 to 6.6 to 1 return on that investment. If people told me my portfolio could get that kind of return, I'd be investing in this in a heartbeat. And because we have already garnered over $160 million in Great Lakes Restoration Initiative activity in the state, we know that over $500 million of economic activity has been generated, conservatively, in the state around the restoration activities going in Muskegon, Detroit, Torch Lake, all over this state. All right? This is serious return on investment. Next slide, please. Water levels clearly impact our blue economy. Excuse me for a second. And when we talk about water levels in the Great Lakes, there are really three factors. I won't get too mathematical on you, have no fear, but there are three factors that account for our water levels. There's the loss from evaporation directly off the surface of the Great Lakes. And most people don't realize this, but the months with the greatest evaporative loss are November and December. Because that's when the gradient, the concentration gradient between temperature and humidity, is the greatest between the lakes and these cold fronts coming in from Canada. So as long as there's not ice on the lakes, which we've had very little of except for the last 2 years, over the last 20 years, we get tremendous evaporative losses. Now the gains are direct precipitation on the lake and runoff from land into the lakes. And so those three factors together generate this net basin supply. Next slide, please. How do we determine whether water levels going up or down are good or bad? Well, when the water levels had been really low for the last 20 years, up until the last 2 years, there was tremendous concern about what we could do in the Great Lakes. And so the International Joint Commission funded a study to look at water levels in the upper Great Lakes. And we looked at 6 different sectors to figure out what they needed for water levels. And you can see this: domestic, municipal, and industrial supplies, commercial, navigation, hydroelectric, ecosystems. Coastal zone includes the people, the real estate along the coastal zone, and then recreational boating and tourism. And not surprisingly, they each have different desires for what the water levels should be. You could look at commercial navigation, and they want water levels relatively high and steady. Ecosystems want variable water levels to help have healthy coastal wetlands. Coastal zone people, the people living on the water, want it relatively low and steady. How do you balance each of these competing demands? It's very, very difficult. In fact, we knew we were doing our jobs well when everybody was equally pissed off at us. Okay? And there's not a lot of job satisfaction in that, let me tell you. Next slide, please. These are the water levels, current water levels. I just got this off the web from the Army Corps of Engineers. The blue line is the long-term average, the blue dotted line. The red line is what the actual water levels have been. And if you go back to 2013, which is the beginning of this graph, let's see if this works. Nope. New battery next time. So if you can bear with me for a second. So we're in 2013 here, lower than average by about a foot. And then starting in 2014, we start to increase, and we've been above average for the last, by about 6 to 9 inches the last year or two. But look at the black lines at the top and the black lines on the bottom. These are the record lows and the record highs. Even though we're above average, which is good news, we're far from what the record levels have been back in 1986, when we really had a lot of concern and loss of real estate along the Great Lakes. Next slide, please. And one thing we have to keep in mind, this is the average water levels. The red represents the long-term mean. The blue are the actual water levels going back to 1916 to the present. And you can see water levels fluctuate. Thank you very much, Erica. Water levels fluctuate dramatically. I'm sure you can see that, right? Over time, with very lows. In fact, we set some record lows in 2013 and record highs in 1986. And this is where we are now. So when we talk about water levels and its impact on economy in the Great Lakes and our real estate and commercial shipping, we need to keep this long-term perspective in mind. All right? It's very difficult to control nature. And in fact, after 5 years of that IJC study, we decided that it really doesn't make sense. The cost of trying to manipulate the water levels in Lake Huron and Michigan would be so expensive, the permitting would probably never be allowed, and the gain would be so small that it just didn't make economic sense. Next, let's see if this works. Excellent, thank you. So finally, how do we accelerate Michigan's blue economy? Well, we have a lot of recommendations that are in our report. If you want to look at that in more detail, please do so. But I just want to identify 3. One is we feel like we need to develop a Blue Business Council. It is critical, from my perspective, it's critical that we have business at the table. Business provides the credibility, and I'm not saying this just because I'm in the business college now. I say this whether I'm talking to an ecological group, an environmental group, or whomever we're speaking to. Business needs to be at the table. They can identify what the needs are, the R&D needs, what their needs are for conservation or for new technologies, and they provide validity and credibility to the process. So let's bring them together, get them thinking about what the water needs, and then partner them with the higher education that brings that intellectual firepower to that table and identify what kind of partnerships, what kind of coalitions can start working collectively on these blue problems and help drive our economy in the process. And then finally, stealing from Grand Rapids Art Prize, we talked about having a Blue Economy Prize for the best new ideas that are out there focused around driving water. So in summary, here in Michigan, we have this incredible geographic location that provides this enviable advantage that we have not been taking advantage of in the past. There's this tremendous opportunity that we should be mobilizing our resources and catalyzing our activities around. We have to be smart about the use of this resource. Again, that caveat from the very beginning. We want to make sure that the water quality and quantity, of which helps define us, provides our identity, is here for future generations as well. And then start acting on these next steps to accelerate use of our water to drive our blue economy. Just want to acknowledge the Mott Foundation for their generous funding and my co-collaborator, John Austin, who's really been the evangelist behind Blue Economy for the last 20 years. And I end with this slide because it helps kind of encapsulate a lot of the work that we do here. This is a former graduate student at the Annis Water Resources Institute. He's now getting his PhD at the University of Maine. We train the water talent of the future. That's our job, and we take it very seriously. He's holding a lake sturgeon, which is an iconic and threatened species here in the Great Lakes, because we're actively working to restore and preserve the habitat for this very important species. And that also is part of our activities here with ecosystem restoration. We're on Muskegon Lake. In the back, you can see the Milwaukee Clipper, which was critical for the commerce in the 20th century on the Great Lakes as it plied these waters of Lake Michigan. And now it's a tourist mecca, a tourist destination on the lake. As people, it actually sits there, it no longer sails, but people come and look at that incredible vessel. And all of that, whether we're talking about tourism, water placemaking, blue business, or ecosystem and aquatic ecology restoration, all of that in aggregate form this blue economy that we feel is really the critical aspect for the future of our state. Thank you for your attention. I'm going to call up Dave Lorenz, Jim Bynum, and Paul Isley and turn it over to Paul. Dave, why don't you sit there? This is frightening.
All right. I actually have to get up here because I'm not mic'd, so if I don't get close enough, you won't hear me. All right, so Al has given us a good overview of where the blue economy is at and why we should care about it. So we decided we also wanted to bring it a little closer to that business side that was important to tie into this. So we brought a few additional guests that were going to help us see how Michigan can leverage this and move us forward. All right? So I'd like to make sure that we talk to both. So we'll start with Dave Lorenz, who's Vice President of Travel Michigan at MEDC, and you should be able to give us a little bit of an indication of how we're using this for brand making.
Thank you and good morning. It's always a pleasure to be here at Grand Valley State University. I was telling my colleagues here today that I get to talk to a lot of university students all around the state, and I'm not just pandering when I say that Grand Valley always has these people, these kids who are engaged. They pay attention. So I really do enjoy being here. Central is another one. And I went to Western, so it pains me to say that. But it's true. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the power of water. And I don't mean that as much so purely as an economic driver as I do more so as a brand driver. So I'll tell you what I mean by that. If you could forward the slide, please.
Does this work?
Oh, maybe so. Hey, there we go. So I'm going to show you, the Pure Michigan brand's been around for almost 10 years. Most people know us, because of the TV ads. They are intended to be emotional, but they're also intended to make a point and to get you to go to michigan.org for more information about traveling all over the state. The very first ad that we made, I'm going to show you, and listen to the very first word in the very first ad. If you can roll that, please.
Water. We take our showers with it. We make our coffee with it. But we rarely tap its true potential and just let it be itself. Flowing freely into clean lakes, clear streams, and along more freshwater coastline than any other state in the country. Come realize water's true potential. Dive in to the waters of pure Michigan. Your trip begins at michigan.org.
So I was asked, how important is water to tourism? Kind of answers that question. It's critically important to Michigan. It's great to be here with the science community and these really intelligent people who can tell you all the facts and figures and how important water is from their perspective. Marketing is mostly an art, but it's also a science. So we know that people will travel for certain passion reasons, things that turn them on to make their life better. And we know through research that water, that's our differentiating point when it comes to driving people to travel to Michigan. That is it for us. Now, we are certainly engaged in constantly trying to find better ways to communicate to our audience. And there's a tourism strategic plan. Some people in the room are involved in this. That's been going on for years. And we look at many various factors that we need to work on. So we talk about collaboration and funding issues and such. You look at that very bottom one, is resources and the environment. This is one of the things that we're working on as an industry. You can move forward, please. And under that category, we've just identified, and you can see what we're talking about there, that Michigan really offers a rich variety of high-quality natural resources. So even as an official strategic planning issue, we know that we need to do all we can, not only to promote the fact that this is the center of 20% of the world's fresh water, but to preserve and make sure that this resource continues to live on as it does. Move forward, please. So there's another report that's just been issued. It's actually in draft form right now from the Office of the Great Lakes. We work with many of these organizations around the state, and this report was just put out on June. I think they're officially past their public comment period, but go to michigan.gov, look through the Office of the Great Lakes information, and look through this report. It's fascinating. When it comes to just tourism-related issues, they talk about the importance to promote water-based economies, also to support water-based recreation, and making sure that we create vibrant waterfronts, all things that we certainly agree with. Next slide, please. So why would that be so important to us? Just look at the numbers, tourism by the numbers, I guess. We touch on 4 of the 5 Great Lakes. Governor Snyder is always saying, I think it's his one joke he uses. He always says 4 of the 5 Great Lakes prefer Michigan. It's funny the first time you hear it. So I hope he never sees this video now that I think about it. But we do have 11,000 inland lakes, 76,000 miles of rivers and streams. You're never more than 5 miles away from a major river or lake. You look at those facts, it really does show that water is our brand. Water is pure Michigan. Again, please. Even in our print publications, it's funny that we didn't go out of our way necessarily to feature water, but it's just natural to us. And I looked at our last 3 guides, all of them have water in one form or the other. And then you look at the winter guide that's coming forward. Next slide. Again, water, again in winter, in a different fashion up at Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore. I don't know if you've ever tried ice climbing. It's fantastic. It is. It's really fun. And they give you this little safety belt thing. And when I do it, I'm always thinking, why don't they pull me up here? But it doesn't work that way. Go forward. And even when we promote a community like Detroit, and Al showed you a slide about the Detroit waterfront, we feature water often. What's happening in Detroit is nothing less than a miracle when it comes to community development. And you need to go there if you've not been to Detroit. And one of the things you need to do is walk the waterfront. You need to understand that not only is this an incredible story when it comes to redevelopment, but even the fact that there is a state park in a municipal setting like this, along this waterfront. Walk it and change your mind about Detroit because it's coming back. It's quite a story. I thought I'd show you 2 more ads. Again, these weren't necessarily picked just because they feature water, but they do tell you stories of how important it is. This is a story that we're going to be telling mostly this coming year and encouraging people to come up to the UP. Go ahead. Oh, didn't work. You want to try it again or just kind of move on?
The open road, It takes on many forms, from the scenic highways to the rugged trails, from the sand-covered to the well-traveled. They lead us to the beauty of nature and the beauty of simple pleasures. The open road is alive and well and waiting to take us to Pure Michigan. Your trip begins at michigan.org.
Could we try to back up one and just see if it will work one more time, just in case? Click on it.
As we cross a bridge known as the Mighty Mac, we find it, something the Ojibwa call Gashige. We know it as timeless, a land that says, slow down, listen to my stories, hear my songs. Timeless can be as big as the sunset on a Great Lake, or as endless as the stars that watch over us. Welcome to Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Welcome to the purest of pure Michigan. Your trip begins at michigan.org.
Thanks. Now if you can move two forward. Thanks. So, you know, our vision always has been, always will be, that Michigan become known as one of America's best travel destinations. And water plays such an important role with that. We all, as community citizens, need to do all we can to protect our water resource. We need to work with all the agencies and organizations, but it really starts at the community level, and I think ends at the community level too. So we need to do our part, because we will be able to drive people here, and as they come here and experience what we get to enjoy every day, it will mean that they'll go back home, they'll tell their friends, and they'll come here too, and we'll have millions of more visitors. We'll have dollars spent at local businesses, tax revenue coming in, and we'll be able to fix those potholes that are out there. And that's just as important that we do that for our brand equity. I think that's it. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you. With all those pretty pictures, we probably should have had you last. But nonetheless, that gives us sort of that very public view of where water is. But we use water a lot for industry, for agriculture, for logistics. Jim Byram, who's president of the Michigan Agribusiness Association, can speak to that to some extent.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. And for those of you that live in Lowell or are familiar with Frankenmuth, and you wonder why in those downtown areas there's these great big private businesses like King Milling, Star of the West Milling, Kellogg and Battle Creek, as you mentioned, it's because of one reason: water. They all were started in those locations because of water power. It's a significant... That's why I didn't use a PowerPoint. Significant development opportunities, and you know, it's interesting to look across the state and across the United States and around the world. And I'm speaking specifically about agriculture, and I just returned about 18 hours ago from Europe, where we walked actually the waterfront, the riverfront in Cologne along the Rhine, which they've done very well in Europe, and I think Grand Rapids and other cities in Michigan are trying to emulate that, and that's commendable. When we look at water, I look at water as from a couple different perspectives. One is use, second is quality, and third is sustainability, and I think that speaks to the business relevance. From a use perspective, logistics. To neglect the use of the Great Lakes for logistics purposes is a tragedy. We certainly are looking at different opportunities at the Port of Muskegon. We had a barge proposal from the river system that didn't move forward. The Coast Guard may revisit that. Looking at moving containers across the lake from Lake Muskegon is an opportunity. But we have a ballast water legislation or regulation in Michigan that we can't discharge ballast water in the Great Lakes. Because of that, we don't load vessels for export here. We can argue the merits of that. Certainly invasive species are an important consideration. But we can't load vessels here. But in Hamilton, Ontario, I think just yesterday they announced another, $100 million investment in an export facility located on the Toronto, near Toronto at Hamilton, Ontario. That's significant. Production. It's not by accident that we have the world's largest seed corn production facility in North America in Southwest Michigan. That would be a DuPont facility, and across the road, interestingly enough, is the second largest seed corn production processing facility in North America that's owned by Monsanto. Both of those facilities account for about 120,000 acres of seed corn production in Southwest Michigan that probably none of you had ever heard of. It's here for one reason: water. Potato production is expanding at a rate that we have not seen in any other state in the union because of one reason: water. You can irrigate. We have sandy soils, which 20 years ago I love to say we used to look at sand in agriculture and say, oh darn, that's sand. Today we look at it and say, hey, that's sand. That means you can irrigate it, you can drain it effectively, and you can engage in agricultural production. Pork production. It's not by accident that's a $250,000 pork processing facility being located in Coldwater, Michigan. Clemens Company, being built right now, and that is because they view Michigan as a region and an area where we can produce more pork more effectively and manage risk. And I'm going to come back to that word risk in a little bit. Dairy production. Some of you have driven by Coopersville. It isn't an auto supply plant anymore. It's one of the largest dairy processing plants in North America. And it continues to grow. I don't think I've ever driven by it, Rick and Chapley, you'd know this, without a crane being at that location. And there's others coming. More dairy production is going to happen in Michigan. We're going to increase the dairy production here, and the reason we're going to do it is because of one reason: water. As we look at quality, however, there's some considerations we're aware of. Certainly the Western Lake Erie Basin is one that we're working hard on. Municipalities are working on wastewater treatment. There's all sorts of things we have to do to deal with that quality issue. That's why we've engaged in a collaboration with the League of here's an interesting group, the League of Conservation Voters, the Municipal Mayors Association of the Great Lakes Basin that covers both countries and all 5 Great Lakes, and the Michigan Agribusiness Association to look cohesively and strategically at water issues, quality issues that affect all 3 of those segments: environmental, municipalities, and agriculture. And finally, as we look at some of the issues with water levels and climate change, or whatever one wants to attribute the changing water paradigms around the U.S., we have strategic advantages here. And you know, it's interesting to talk about, do we need to put a group together to talk about it? And yes, we do. But trust me, the private sector's figured it out. Just yesterday and the day before, I was meeting with companies like Tesco, the largest supermarket chain in the United Kingdom. Prince's Foods, one of the largest food processors in the world. Bayer and BASF in Germany. They know Michigan. They know water. And when it comes to major food companies, they're concerned with several things, but one of the major things they're concerned about is risk management. And risk management in many contexts is concerned about, are we going to be able to grow stuff? Are we going to be able to produce? And the biggest limiting factor as we look at production agriculture around the world, and especially around the United States, is water. I spent 4 days in the Imperial and San Joaquin Valleys in California. I won't say they're beautiful areas because they're flat and they're old deserts and one of those things, but they suck a lot of water. Federal water projects, groundwater depletion, the Ogallala Aquifer, need I say more? We have water resources here, and many have said it before, and I love to plagiarize. Water is the new oil. And there's absolutely no question that when it comes to business and development, Michigan has advantages that we haven't even begun to tap. I will suggest that in the next 18 months, interestingly enough, a lot of it attracted by water, we're going to spend $1 billion in Michigan in agricultural processing, production, and other resources, because this is the state to be in as one looks at managing risk, looks at maximizing opportunity, and sustainability. We have to be concerned about water access responsibly. We have to be concerned about water quality. We have to be concerned about depletion. But when it comes to future development, responsible use, strategic approach, and management of the resource, our industry is fully on board, because that is the story we have to tell here. It's a pretty dynamic story, and it's one that we're pretty proud of. And when I walk in a supermarket chain like Tesco, who is the largest food retailer in the UK, as I mentioned, and they know exactly where we're from, exactly what we do, and they want to come here to talk to us more about what they can buy from this state, that bodes well for our future.
Well, very good. We now have the more scientific view, the business view, and the tourism view in play. So we have a few minutes for questions. Do we have any questions that people want to ask our group of experts here? Yes.
Could you comment on invasive species, Asian carp coming in, I don't know how that affects the tourism side, but it's in the water.
The question was a question about speaking to the invasive species issue.
And in particular with Asian carp, which is a question that we get quite frequently. I'm sure most people are familiar that the Asian carp, which are actually 4 different species, are migrating their way up the Mississippi River as well as other waterways, knocking on the door of the Great Lakes. There's tremendous concern that if they got in the Great Lakes, they could change the food web that we currently have and have devastating effects. We've all seen the silver carp jumping out of the Illinois River due to prop action, and it's quite dramatic. And so there's a lot of activity. There's a lot of money being spent on studying this, about whether the Great Lakes Basin and the Mississippi River Basin should be hydrologically disconnected. In order to do that, however, they need to deal with all the stormwater that would now go into Lake Michigan, which is the drinking water for Chicago. And so they don't want to do that. So a lot of the money would be in building these large tunnels or storage basins for all of their stormwater. So the cost would be enormous to do that. It's working its way through the federal agencies right now and trying to figure out what is feasible economically, permitting, engineering-wise. And nobody knows exactly where this will go. I do have one caveat here. We're spending literally $30 to $50 million studying the Asian carp issue right now. And I believe in being as precautionary as possible. We don't want them in the Great Lakes, clearly. But in the meantime, we have 950 trillion, that's with a T, trillion, quagga and zebra mussels in Lake Michigan that are literally sucking the bioenergetic life out of that lake. We are seeing dramatic changes in the food web of Lake Michigan right now. The salmon fishery is at the cusp of going away in Lake Michigan like it did in Lake Huron because there's not enough prey fish for them because the food, instead of going into the prey fish, is going into these zebra and quagga mussels. And so the zebra and quagga mussels don't jump out of the water. They don't provide that visual experience that the Asian carp do, so they don't get the same attention. But I do think we need to be focused on the existing problems that are already here and having damaging effects, as well as focusing on potential problems in the future.
On behalf of the travel industry, there's an organization called the Travel Industry Coalition of Michigan, and it's basically an association of associations. And they've gone on record, of course, of their concern about invasive species, specifically to Asian carp, and trying to do all we can to encourage Illinois to do something about this. And of course, it's a federal issue. And so we're looking at a lot of kind of backdoor ways to get that done, working through associations in other states to encourage their politicians to make this happen. We know there's no cheap way to get around this, but it has to happen. Because if those fish get into the Great Lakes, just on the brand perception area alone, we have this fishery that is incredible. It's a multi-million-dollar business. Salmon alone, a multi-million-dollar business. What would happen if and we have enough problems with salmon right now, what would happen if our salmon population was depleted because of Asian carp? Same thing with any of our other fish that are out there. Fishing, hunting, they're part of our culture, but they're also huge economic drivers. Just as Al was talking about other invasive species issues, there's also other issues out there like microbeads, these little teeny things and cleansing products and whatever. And so we've also gone on record trying to stop them because they're getting into the system and they're just as damaging as many of these invasives. So we're very much engaged through our form of a political process, through the associations, trying to encourage both the feds and our state various agencies, DNR, DEQ, and such, to try to do all we can to stop these things.
Paul, I mentioned ballast water, which is a major concern, and folks are watching ballast water as an issue. Michigan has a regulation you can't discharge ballast water, and that's the concern, invasive species that may be in that ballast water that may have been picked up in another part of the world. Certainly makes sense. The problem, I think, as Peter would agree, we like a level playing field in business. We don't have that. Because you can be 300 yards to the east in Detroit and you can discharge ballast water in Windsor. Or you can do it in Wisconsin or any Illinois port or any Indiana port or any Ontario port. That's a problem. It's putting us at a competitive disadvantage. Politically and socially and environmentally, we're probably right. But we're right at the expense of business. My contention is that there needs to be a far more aggressive effort across the basin to address the whole ballast water issue, because those little critters swim. Doesn't matter if they're in Windsor or Detroit.
That's true. I think I have time for one more question, and I think Rick had his hand up first.
Thank you. All three presenters, I think, did a great job of explaining the opportunities associated with our water. You just started to touch upon threats to the quality of our water, and I guess I would also ask our speakers to elaborate about threats to the quantity of our water. Al?
I'll go first, but I'm sure Jim and Dave can elaborate on this. I would say there are two reasons why we don't need to be overly concerned about that. One is because we have been very progressive in developing the Great Lakes Compact. So that compact provides legislative protection for anybody to take water out of the basin. And so there is a political process that prevents it. But even more importantly, particularly for this crowd, as I mentioned earlier, the economics of pumping water is incredibly expensive. It would be cheaper for the people in Santa Barbara or the San Joaquin Valley to haul an iceberg from the Arctic down off of LA and melt that water and pump it to the San Joaquin Valley than it would be to take a pipe, build a pipe from Lake Michigan and do it there. And as long as the economics are against it, it's never going to happen. And it would take an enormous change in our economic structure to make it feasible to make that happen. So I don't think that's a risk, personally.
You know, the way this affects us is really on water levels to a great degree. So for instance, the cruise ship industry, we've been doing all we can to encourage cruise ship business to come back. And it's starting to work, and we're working with TSA on various rules and issues, and that's starting to work. But the water levels were an issue up until recently, and actually discouraged a major cruise ship, German-operated ship, from coming in. So we're concerned about it. It's what's the old term? I forget who said it. Mark Twain said, "Everybody complains about the weather, but nobody does anything about it." And so, you know, we're concerned about it, and we're actually trying to adjust to it, to encourage communities to prepare their docks so that they can accept ships, you know, of all depth ranges.
Water you can see is pretty easy when you look at a lake or a stream. Groundwater is what we tend to be very concerned about. And the one thing that's very clear to me, and I think to you as well, and everybody that's a scientist that looks at the water issue, is we don't understand groundwater. Hard to believe, but we don't. For example, Southwest Michigan, I referred to, Cass and St. Joe County, there's more concentration of irrigation, above ground irrigation in those two counties than any counties east of the Mississippi. And water levels there haven't moved 3 inches. And they've been doing that down there for a long time, 50 years. However, you go to Allendale or you go to Tuscola County, whoops, you have a different problem. So A, we don't understand groundwater issues, and we have to understand them better, which means more research, better geographic information, better hydrology information, all sorts of things. So that's an issue that we're concerned about. We were part of the Water Use Study Committee, working closely with DEQ and the Office of the Great Lakes on water use issues. That's one we have a lot to learn. We have a tool in Michigan that's pretty unique on where you can drill new high-capacity wells, but that probably needs some tweaking and some more work as well. So that's the water access issue. In terms of water quality, you know, that's why it's kind of interesting to work with mayors in this new collaboration I mentioned, because why do we have situations where we have farms building state-of-the-art wastewater treatment plants? Why do we have situations where we try to manage waste in a situation that might be 5 or 10 miles from a municipality? In most municipalities in Michigan, the irony is, have far more water treatment capacity than they're using. Herbrooks out here west of town or east of town, you're familiar with the big poultry operation. They partnered with Lake Odessa to expand their wastewater treatment plant to handle the wastewater that come from Herbrooks. And they built a pipe, and then anybody that wants to tap in along the way can do so. Isn't that a unique solution? I don't know who said it, but common sense is something that's way too uncommon. It seems that there's many opportunities like that in the state of Michigan to deal with some of those water quality issues. Muskegon has more capacity than they can say grace over in water treatment capacity, and we need to be making use of that. Lots of opportunities out here in terms of agricultural runoff. We have several different things we're doing agriculturally around the state or around the country. You'll hear we need to take phosphorus out of lawn fertilizer. Yeah, we did that 5 years ago in Michigan. Surrounding states in the Great Lakes haven't done it. We have a very aggressive voluntary environmental program for farms. From our perspective, we just launched a certified fertilizer applicator program for commercial fertilizer users. We've been very aggressive with several programs that are environmentally sound for the industry. But even beyond that, we talk about it. And we talk about it internally as well as externally. You know, one thing I love to say is agriculture does a great job of talking to ourselves. We don't talk to anybody else. You know, the Great Lakes governors came down just at their last meeting with, we want to reduce phosphorus loading in the Great Lakes from agriculture by 40%. You know what we've done in the last 10 years already? Reduced phosphorus use by 40% in the Great Lakes Basin. We've already done that. Can we do it again? Yeah, probably can. With site-specific agriculture technology, doing a better job, but the most important thing is just being aware of it and thinking about it.
Yeah, and I do think, you know, when it comes to any big issue, unless you have people of, you know, goodwill who are going to come together and actually try to come to a solution that makes sense, it doesn't really matter. Just to your point about invasives. Same thing with something like overflow. Certain people from different sectors have different perspectives. And until we really get to the point where we will really listen to each other and talk to each other and get to a political system that we're actually working together, and we're not there right now. Look at our federal politics. It's not there. So we need to get there, and the only way we'll get there is by putting the right people in those offices.
In fact, if I can even piggyback on that, one of our initial proposals in our new collaboration with the mayor's group is, should agriculture support bond issues to enhance and improve wastewater treatment in cities? From a water quality perspective, it's a big issue.
Well, the technical solutions are actually the easy solutions. It's changing human behavior that is very difficult.
Well, on that note, I believe we've reached the end of the component. So we should thank our speakers. And for Al, since he spent so much time talking about water, we have a certificate where we have donated your name for water in Honduras.
Thank you. That's fantastic.
Thank you. Beyond that, I'd like to say see you on November 6th, and have a good day.